was a dark and stormy night, as cliché as that sounds, but that's exactly how it began. This typical night was more than just black and stormy. It was bitter cold, the coldest temperatures the region had seen in decades. The precipitation falling from the sky was a glistening, silent snow. Due to heavy snowfall, traffic had diminished down until desolation reigned supreme, especially in the particularly rural area of which the little green coupe was currently braving the roads. If the driver had his choice, he'd be home, nestled safely beside a roaring fireplace, but the group had been visiting family and headed home as the storm had set in. Behind the wheel drove Neil, and beside him in the passenger seat sat Elizabeth, his wife. The two were remaining relatively silent, Neil intently focused upon the snow-covered roads before the hood of the vehicle. The only chatter that was emanating within the car was coming from the 8-month-old baby boy in the back seat, talking to his feet, nestled tightly into his car seat. Elizabeth was more than anxious at the terrible road conditions, but remained silent and observably calm, trying not to distract her husband. The couple had left much later than they had planned, setting them back nearly 3 hours without the encumbrance of the storm. The vehicle was old, but very reliable. Neil had decided to take some back roads in order to shave off some time and stay ahead of the storm. Unfortunately, the storm rolled into the area faster than predicted, facilitating a dangerous situation strengthened by deviation from the couple's original route. The car was front-wheel drive and had studded snow tires mounted on the front, but preparation proved futile when the car turned a corner at a cautiously slow speed and onto a patch of ice. The vehicle remained mostly undamaged, minus a busted headlight, but was now stuck deep in a snowbank with no chance of being released without assistance. Neil first let out a plethora of curses before being reminded by his wife of the baby in the back. The two sat for a few minutes, thinking about what they should do. Neil pulled out his cell to discover a lack of service. Husband and wife considered their options, wondering how far the nearest residence could be. The two had traveled well over 10 miles into the mountainous wilderness and hadn't seen so much as another car, never mind a house or gas station. Lizzie suggested bundling the baby up as much as possible and accompanying her husband to find some help. Neil explained to her that because he had no idea how far he would have to travel, that she should stay there in the heated, running vehicle with the baby and wait for him to return with help. The trip they had taken was a day trip, so an excessive amount of clothing wasn't available at the moment. Reluctantly, Elizabeth agreed and resigned herself to the car and to remain with the baby. Neil gave his wife a long kiss goodbye before opening the door to exit the vehicle. Elizabeth watched her husband trail off into the blurry distance, occasionally looking back until she couldn't see him at all. Once gone from sight, Lizzie unfastened her baby from the seat in the back and placed him on her lap. She played with him, fed him, turned on the radio for a little ambient music, trying to keep both herself and the 8-month-old busy and as content as possible. Watching the snowfall gently, yet relentlessly out her window, Lizzie marveled at the fact that she had yet to see another vehicle. Even in the worst of storms or in the dead of night, an occasional vehicle is present on just about every roadway, no matter how isolated. Call it coincidence or providence, but as those thoughts began passing through her mind, headlights in the distance of the night could be seen moving perpendicularly to the road that the vehicle was stuck upon, illuminating its path as it moved towards a T in the road previously unrecognized by Lily only a couple hundred yards away. Thoughts of being able to flag down the driver, rescue herself and her family, raced through her consciousness. The vehicle was moving slowly, but She would have to hurry if she were to make it to him before he drove by. She was struggling with her baby, trying to place him into his seat and refasten him into it. She didn't want to bring the boy with her out into the cold and didn't want him loose in the car while she was away. With haste and a slight pinch of her fingers as the buckle snapped into place, Liz left the confines of the vehicle, shut the door, and began walking in the direction of the oncoming headlights. She instantly identified the distant vehicle as a plow truck and also knew it was far too close to the intersection for her to flag it down if it did decide to pass by the turn and keep heading straight. Disappointed, she watched the truck do just that, only moments after she had left the car. The air was so crisp. She could literally smell the snow in the air. Her thoughts drifted to the overly biting cold before she heard the muffled sounds of a baby crying from within the abandoned vehicle behind her. Disheartened, Elizabeth turned and headed back to the car, hoping the plow truck would see her walking husband and facilitate their rescue. Liz reopened the passenger side door and climbed in to console her frightened baby. Neil had been walking for quite some time. After leaving the car and walking ahead, he came upon a T in the road. Looking both ways to be greeted with the desolate nothingness of a deserted, cold, winter night of the mountains forest, Neil decided left was as good a direction as any and walked off. An occasional gust of wind, the crunch of snow beneath his feet. His breath nearly froze by the time it left his mouth. Neil thought to himself that if he stopped to take a leak, his urine would probably freeze solid as well. He knew he didn't have much time to waste. The couple had more than enough gas to make it home, but he was unsure if it would be enough to keep the vehicle idling for an extended period of time. Neil quickened his pace, and as he did, the ominous glow of illumination began ever growing in intensity behind him. With hopeful eyes, Neil turned around to discover an approaching vehicle. From the increasing sounds of metal scraping along pavement, Neil immediately identified it as a plow truck. As it grew closer, Neil threw his hands up into the air, attempting to wave the driver down. Just before the headlights landed upon his person, Neil slipped on a small patch of ice and went down onto his rear with a thud. He started to struggle to his now cold feet, but it was too late. The plow truck was going too fast, had gotten too close, and Neil had fallen below the driver's line of sight over the plow. It was the loud noise itself that encouraged the driver to pull over. He hadn't seen what he had hit, only heard it. The man climbed out of the truck, searched the nearby snowbanks, and discovered a bloody Neil, killed on impact. A gash in his forehead so deep, the wound nearly cleaved his head in two. The young driver panicked, fearful of manslaughter charges and a subsequent prison term, and re-entered his idling truck before speeding off into the dead of night. Neil was a victim of hit and run. Hours passed by. The car was having difficulty keeping up with the ever-dropping temperatures outside. Elizabeth's worry began to grow. Becoming frantic and a little impatient, Elizabeth checked her now sleeping baby before, once again, climbing out of the passenger side door to take a look around with her naked eyes. No more headlights. Still no glowing lights of houses in the distance. Hours had passed, yet the only difference in her freezing environment was the ever-accumulating snowfall. Liz strained her eyes in the dark, desperately trying to land sight on any form of salvation. Just then, she heard a frantic sputtering just before the car stopped running. The parking lights were still on, but the engine had died. Elizabeth's heart sank into the pit of her stomach as she rushed to the driver's side door, opened it before climbing in, and attempted repeatedly to start the car. The formerly running car that had been keeping both her and her helpless baby warm had finally run out of gas. Elizabeth's panic increased tenfold. Not even the fucking cigarette lighter worked. She ran through several futile scenarios over and over again in her mind until the temperature in the car had dropped so much that the baby in the back seat awoke and began to fuss. Out of options, Liz crawled into the back seat, sat beside her baby boy, and wrapped her arms around him in an attempt to keep him warm. By the time dawn had broken over the horizon the following morning, the snowfall had nearly stopped. The car's battery long having died out, leaving the parking lights off. The old man in his four-wheel drive vehicle, on his way to work that morning, however, didn't need to see the parking lights in order to recognize the bright green coupe stuck deep into a snowbank off the side of the road. Fearful that someone could be hurt, he pulled over just past the coupe and climbed out of his truck to investigate. Looking in through the front windows, he saw it vacant. But upon looking in the back ones, he found a bundled-up woman, still clutching to something in her arms. It was a car seat. He knocked on the window, expecting the woman to move, at least in the slightest. She did not. He then opened the door and repeated his inquisitions. Still no answer. At this time, the old man concluded he should call 911 before disturbing the scene any further, and that's when he heard it. The quiet, muffled sound of a baby cry. It was coming from beneath the woman. Now knowing what he needed to do, the man pulled the woman's frigid arms, stiff with rigor mortis, away from the car seat and found me. That man saved my life that day, but my mother saved it the night before. She had given me her last ounce of warmth in order to preserve my existence. So, Mom, thank you. Thank you for your sacrifices that have made my life possible.